Principle 18, plant communities, not services. And one of the areas that box 1 stuff can undermine our box 2, where the urgent can overtake the important, can happen at the very beginning of a planting journey. And historically, nearly all sort of church plants or worship communities or missionary communities or whatever, thankfully not all, but nearly all, have focused on planting a worship service in a particular area or sort of context or sort of culture. We plant, and what we mean by that is that we establish a worship service in a different context, in a pub or in a school or in a retail unit, as we did in Gateway, anywhere. Can I plead with you, in this thing that you are planting, unless there is a powerful and unequivocal word from God, don't do it. Don't do it. It's part of the sort of received wisdom, or not so much wisdom, in planting. But I can promise you it is nearly always some kind of mistake. I've planted 2 churches in the last decade who made that same mistake twice. I've been involved in loads of other planting journeys. I've seen this mistake happen over and over and over and over again. Very briefly, here's why. Here's a number of reasons why it is a mistake, I feel, to plant initially, when you are planting something, to plant worship services. First reason, it is nearly never contextual. As we have been saying, it is vital that the context defines virtually everything that you do as a plant or community. When we plant worship services, they are nearly always what we are bringing to the sort of concept, the context. It's our own biases and presuppositions and sort of presumptions. We don't allow the context to actually mold and form and shape it. And in planting, as we have heard, context is absolutely key. It's a mistake planting worship services because it's nearly never contextual. Secondly, it hardly ever makes disciples. I know it does sometimes, but it hardly ever does, regularly, repeatedly. Do you know how many Church of England churches there are? I Googled it. I looked it up, 17,847. Some might have closed, some might have been planted. That's approximately right. And if each of these churches did 1 service a week, and many do many more, but if we count 1 a week, that's 928,044 services every single year. Let's call it around 1 million. About 1 million Church of England services every year. And I know these are of variable quality, and that's, putting it mildly. But if services made and grew disciples, we would be seeing revival in this country. And yet what we have seen for decades is steep and pretty terrible decline. Don't be fooled into thinking this is box 2, that's important but not urgent stuff. It isn't. Worship services rarely ever make disciples by themselves. Number 3, it hardly ever grows disciples. It does not make people grow as disciples. They're a good thing, but they don't do this. If I were to ask you how you were to grow as a disciple, I guarantee you will say it's in some kind of community and through some kind of experience. Maybe through going through a sort of tough time, through stepping out in faith, through hearing God speak to you, and responding to that, being stretched, finding that you can do it. Worship services are great, but they don't do that. They hardly ever grow disciples. Number 4, they distract leaders from box 2 activities. As we heard about in that last principle, the work of making and growing disciples is a box 2 activity. It's important, but it hasn't got any sense of urgency attached. Weekly worship services are most definitely a box 1 activity. Their weekly routine provides a certain amount of urgency to them. In fact, a lot of urgency. And they take a great amount of effort and time and creativity to be poured into them. I was involved in a church plant in a college, and we worked out that it took 24 out of the 30 people involved in that church plant to put on a service every single week. all the time and effort and creativity being poured into that. Often so much time is taken up on this, there is little time to focus on the box 2 important stuff. And there are other problems which services have in general that I don't have time to actually get into. You might not agree with all of these. They are consumerist. In general, in services, I come to actually consume what's on offer. If it isn't good enough, I move on to somewhere else that's better. They are passive. In many ways, in some ways, not every worship service is like this. It's almost like TV. I actually come, I sit there, and I watch what happens, I get done to. And finally, it doesn't grow community. You can sit beside somebody in a service, in whatever context, for years and never even talk to them. This can even happen in small contexts. And when I speak about community, I'm talking about real community, that type of community that is talked about in Acts, which is characterized by crazy generosity and radical sacrificial love and shared time and shared food and shared space. Services are great, but they don't do that. They don't grow community like that. And the truth is, gather worship will happen. Gather worship will and should happen. As we'll see in our next principle, it is one of the 5 key marks of a worship community, of a plant. Worship services that are developed carefully, that are developed contextually, that do not ever become the center of gravity of your worship community or plant. They are good, they are powerful, and they are healthy. But don't plant it. What you do at the beginning sets your sense of priority. For many years, planting has been associated with a worship service planted in a particular area or context or culture. I'll say one last time on this. Can I plead with you? In this thing that you are planting, unless there's a powerful and unequivocal word from God, don't do that. Plant communities, don't plant worship services.